So I've been asked for a screencast revising the use of structures in MATLAB. So I'm just going to run through this example code which I've written here. So I'll set a breakpoint here, and then let's have a look at it line by line. So what we do at the beginning here is simply print out the heading, which you can see over here in the command window. So now what I'm doing is simply creating a structure called player, and it's being created by assignment. So if I write player dot and then some field name, then what that will do is create a structure player and also assign one of the fields inside of it. So we can step through each of these lines. So we're up to here now, and we can have a look at the variable player by mousing over it. So far we've set these two fields only. We could also, over here in the command window, type player and inspect the value of that variable. So back here in the code, let's keep stepping through. So now what we've done is we've assigned 4 different fields inside this structure, and basically we can get them back simply by referring to them with the dot notation. So let's run that line, and you see what it printed out over here. We recalled a value that we had previously placed inside the structure. So now what I'm going to show you is something a little bit cleverer. We're going to loop over each field. So we're going to make a for loop, and we're going to process each field inside that structure as part of that loop. So let's have a look. First line here just prints out something to the screen, player stat, so we'll just run that. And now what we're doing is we're running this function field names. So I'll show you the help for field names. Basically returns the fields of a structure, returns a cell array of strings containing the structure field names. So we can actually play with it over here in the command window. So let's do field names player, and so here are all of the fields which exist inside our player structure. So let's run that line, and so our variable fields here, cell array of those strings. So now what I want to do is loop over each of those. Because it's a cell array, what I need to do is index it with the curly braces, so I need to have a counter variable that goes from 1 up to the number of elements inside fields. So let's enter into our first loop, through first iteration of that loop. So the value R here is 1, and the field is health. This is the first one in our fields array. So now what we're going to do is pull out that corresponding value from the player array here. So this is where we use the parentheses here to dynamically look up a field. So let's have a play with what we mean by that. So if I simply did player.field, right, this is going to give an error because there is no such field, literally field. But if I did with brackets here, then we get back the value 100. Now why did that happen? Because field is the string health, and so that is the same as writing player.health. So you can see how having the name of a field inside a variable allows us to look that up by the value of a variable rather than hard coding the name in like we had done in this little example here. So we pull that out, and then we print it out to the screen. And so just a bit of notation here, the 12 as the length specifier on the string there simply means padded out with spaces. So it puts spaces here on the left so that the total size of that field is 12 characters long. So what that's going to do is basically pad them all out so that they'll all be in a nice neat column. So let's just run through that, step through line by line and watch it run. And you can see what's happened is we printed out the values, the names and the values of each of the fields, and they're all nicely aligned like you can see there in that column. Alright, so that was the first example that I wanted to show. So let's continue on. Now I'm going to talk about structure arrays. So print out a heading. Basically what we're going to do is put the structure from before into an array. And so we're having a players array which is going to contain 2 players, so 1 and 2. And initially what we'll do is set them both to be equal to the template that we had from before. So what happens first of all, if we just do players, what it prints out is that we have a 1 by 2 struct array, and these are the fields which are inside that struct array. And so we can get to the first item by indexing players 1, the second by players 2, and right now they're the same. And so we can modify them like the syntax that you see over here, so let's step through run those. And so now if I do players 2, you can see that the numbers have changed according to the assignments that we just did. So one neat thing that I'm just going to show you with regard to structure arrays is suppose we want to get the total score of both players. Well, one thing that we could do is something like this. Players1.score plus players2.score, and we could add them up. But if there were more than 2 players, then this would get a bit tedious, so you'd probably want to write a for loop for that. But there's actually, well, let's run that first of all. So total score is players1.score, blah blah blah, and then we print it out, and the score is 110. But there's actually an easier way to do this, which is if we have the structure array and then we use the dot on that. So players dot score will give us back these 2 values separately, which are the scores of each of our players. And we can actually collect them into an array if we put square brackets around it like this. So the square brackets means collected into an array, and so then we get score of the first player and then the score of the second player. So we assign that here to the variable scores, which is these 2 values that we just saw, and then we add them up and then we print it out. And so that's 2 ways of basically going through and getting the total score for each of the players. So this sort of notation is actually used in the A* search example that we looked at in class.